Well, full disclosure, I've screwed up big time. One of the things that allows me to make these videos is a boat is made up of a port side and a starboard side. So what normally happens with my videos is that I'll do the work either on the port or the starboard side, make all the errors there, work out all the problems. And then when I go to the opposite side, I've worked out all the errors. And so you don't see that part of it. And it looks like I'm doing it perfectly the first time. Of course, all of you who build models know that's just not on. I absolutely screwed up the stern of the boat, which has no port and no starboard. I have to get it right the first time. So I've had to take out all of the windows and start from scratch. There were a few errors I made. The first one is that I forgot to put this little support on the bottom, and that's really makes the lights much smaller. And the second thing is, having made the pieces, so it's not all lost, none of the center mullions lined up perfectly. Some of them did, some of them didn't. So I sat down and thought about how I was going to do this, and decided really that the best way was to make the plastic inserts and then draw a line using the French ruler on one side and then flipping it around on the other side and draw a perfect arc so that I get that nice clean line, which David points out in the book is so important, and that it's a major aspect that can't be hidden if you get it wrong. So that's what we've done. And I'm not going to go through all the milling side of it again. I'm using the same process that I used to make the first set of windows. And I'll show you just some of the key components that weren't covered in the previous video. The other thing I didn't do, and again, I have no explanation, is I really didn't clean up the aft end of the model to make sure that everything flowed correctly. And so when I did that, I realized I had some filling to do on these timbers here. Two of them were recessed in, so I had to bring it back out and really clean up the lines so that everything flowed nicely on the pieces, so that when the windows go in, which is, again, common sense would tell you, they fit nice and neat. And the same thing that when this piece is installed, again, it fits correctly on the model. So I've had to fill in some instances, and I'm flattening them down now, which is not a fatal problem. Again, it just means building back up and getting these surfaces absolutely clean so that when we put the windows or lights in, we get a perfect surface. Of course, we need to remember that this is a curved surface, and we have to be very careful to make sure that I don't take away from the curve, but just get the pieces to flow one to the other. In the last video, there was a comment that I wasn't showing enough detail. So I reviewed the last video, and I don't agree with that person. Having said that, there certainly are things I could have explained or shown a little better. So I'm going to include some of those things in the following clips as we go forward. In the book, David makes reference to using glass. In fact, I think it's microscope glass that he uses to put in the back of the frames, and he makes up the frames separately. That's real hard, and it's just so much easier to use plexiglass, which is what I'm using, or any sort of plastic frame. And that's really what I've chosen to use. His glass, he's suggesting microscope glass, which are a little thin glass, and then using a stone to grind it down to get a perfect fit. Those of you who wish, I wish you good luck. I am going to use a plexiglass. And in this case, whereas in what I showed in the previous video, I had actually machined the edge of the plexiglass to hold the frame both on the bottom and the side, I've now found it's much easier simply to machine the whole side of the plexiglass and just fit the frame to the side. So again, here is the process. Here is the piece that we're going to cut. The outside line is the exact fit in the window. The inside line is what we're going to grind down to once the outside line fits perfectly. So to do that, we're going to grind it down on the Jim Barnes desktop sander. One of the great things about this is that I can move the support and make sure that I'm grinding down a parallel cut. Of course, this just requires you going back and forward, taking a little bit each time until we get a perfect fit. The problem I now face is that in fitting the plexiglass into the model, I actually went further than the lines that I had pre-drawn, which is not a big problem. This is really just a guide. So what I can do is now turn the piece over, take the frames, because I know this is a perfect, line it up and draw a line, and then go back on the machine and grind it down just short of that line, because the thickness of the pencil will, if I go past the pencil line, the thickness of the pencil will mean it's too small. Of course, what I'm really trying to do is to make sure that the pieces fit as perfectly as I can. So using the actual frame means that the line I'm going to cut down should be or should leave me with a piece of plexi that fits perfectly. Now again, I just on some very thin sandpaper. This is 400. Just so that I have none of the edges that we ground off. You want to make sure that the clear edge is in fact that there's no waste, because it'll come back and give us a problem later on. Now what we're going to do is go on the mill as we've done before and cut those grooves, and the grooves will allow the mullions to fit tightly inside. So how we do this is we take a vernier caliper, mark the center line in each side, and then very carefully draw a line. And then we take a pencil and shade the line, which gives us a nice, clean, easy to see line, onto the mill and cut the piece. So to do this, back to the trusted vernier caliper, just taking your time to make sure that it's absolutely even on both sides, so you get nice clean lines and equal panes of glass. So again, now you have a perfect square of a window equally divided. Now this, on the middle, there's this wonderful turntable with a vise that allows me to move the vise in either direction. So I've lined it up on the center here. I've lined it up on the center there, so I have a perfect line. So now I can simply cut it. Oh, that's ruined the piece. By now you all know me, and full disclosure, I screwed up this piece. I didn't clamp it properly in the vise. And it drilled a hole right through it. So it's now almost over clamped, and the reason for that is I tried to cheat a little bit by securing it in the vise in the uneven sides, and so it only tightened on 3 points and left 1 point. So you need to get the pieces that are most parallel to put it in the vise to make sure that doesn't happen. So here we go. And after all these years of using my mill, you think I would know better. If you're going to clamp a piece in a vise, then all the corners have to be very, very tight in the jaws of the vise. Or then you need to use some hold down clamps that will hold the piece flat on the surface. No excuse, stupidity is earned, not learned. So once all that's done, it's just clean up. Again, I use a mullion to clean it up, and then glue it in place, and it's done. The problem I'm now having is that the mullions don't line up, and I've made up all the lights, and it's really very frustrating. This is the second time I'm doing this. Of course, the only person I have to blame is myself, but that's the nature of model building. So I've sat down and thought, what could be the possible solution to this problem? So as you can see, I'm getting a little smarter now. Rather than make the whole piece and then put the mullions in, I've put the center mullions in and they've all lined up perfectly, which means I haven't made an error yet. And now that I'm happy with that, I can then cut the ones going up and down. And then I'm going to take two approaches. One is I'm going to simply put the frames in, try and make up the frames as a standalone frame. And the second one is I'll cut off the thickness, the 4 inches around each of the plexiglass pieces, and then put the frame directly onto the plexiglass, so it becomes a solid unit. The other thing that was bothering me was, since I'm slightly oversized on the mullions, how could I make the mullions seem smaller? And that wasn't as hard as I thought it was. It just requires a little patience. And what I'm doing is taking a chisel and shaping the mullions on the piece. And all you have to be is very careful that you don't scratch the plexiglass. So here it is. This is really, it's reduced in size tremendously and probably almost dead on to scale in terms of the image or how it looks. Well, third time lucky. Look how beautiful all the window sills, the mullions line up perfectly. You know, lots of other windows made up. So now we're going to make those up and scribe them in, and we'll put the 4-inch mullions around the outside. And to reduce the size of the mullions, I've made up a scraper, and we're simply going to pull it along, and that's actually going to take me below the 1.5 inches and give the mullions some real shape, like they would have been on the original ship. I don't know if you can see that. So now let's fit them all in. And a lovely, nice, clean line. Now we're going to do a different method, and it follows more the tradition that you find in the book. David talks about taking a template, a paper template, and then using that template to make up the individual frames. And we've done this as 1, 2, and we're now about to start on the center one. And then I use the desktop sander. Is really the most efficient way of slowly fitting the pieces there. The process is simple. I have my bulk stock. I cut rough pieces and slowly fit the bottom first, then the 2 sides, and then I make a perfect frame. Once I get it to fit, I'll use some PVA glue just on the joint, and I'll put a touch of CA to lock it in place, making very careful not to stick it to the counter timbers. If you're nervous about that, there's actually a compound that you can paint on the inner of the frame, which creates a little film. And I have some of that from a building friend of mine. And that allows you, it's actually a mold release product. And the frame will not stick to the inner side of the counter timbers. So I'll just do one with you and you'll get an idea of what's involved, and we'll do this on time lapse. That's where this piece comes in so useful, because you can work out the angle by looking at the model and then move this to grind and cut the frame piece as you see fit. It's almost impossible to work the angle, but visually you can see it. And as you start to fit it, you'll be able to adjust the angle as we go along. Of course, this is an exercise in patience, going back and forward on the desktop sander, taking little bits each time. If you're not careful, you'll end up with a lot of spare parts. I was surprised when I had completed this. I actually only had 3 pieces that were cut too short. So there we go. Sometimes you have to give it a little push. There we go. So what I do is I tend to give it, again, a little touch up with some super glue. This is thin CA. So that any part of the joint that's not fully stuck gets stuck down. And then I'll just clean it up on a piece of fresh sandpaper. And it looks perfect, and it, again, compared to the other one, it absolutely fits perfect. We have cleaned them all up, and we'll fit each one, and it's not going to be, you're not going to get a better fit than this, for the simple reason that this is built to what your model looks like. So you'll see there are slight variations between what's shown in the plan and what's actually as built. And really very happy with that. So all that's left is for us to put the center mullions in and then attach to the glass. This is a piece of plexi that I've cut that fits exactly in this one. Would help if I put it in the right way. There we go. And even though it fits in perfectly, I need to chamfer the back of it a little bit. But it's quite a bit different than the ones I first made, and again, literally a perfect fit. So the next step is to center everything, recenter everything, so we get a nice clean line right across, and those center mullions line up perfectly with each other. Then we'll put the center pieces in. Then we'll stick the plexiglass to the piece, again making sure we get no glue on the inside. Then I'm going to take the thickness of this down to 1.5 inches, put the curved surface on the mullion. And then I'm going to show you my last little learning or practice, which I'll discuss then. That's enough for today. We're at that 20-minute magic mark, and we'll see you in the next video when we complete the stern windows or the lights on the HMS Thorn. So remember, keep modeling,